In the previous episode, Einar, the hunter of the East, is a skilled and fearless Viking, known for his courage and dexterity. His journey begins with the hunt for the Shadow Brothers, a group of giant bears that terrorize the island. After a first encounter with a common bear carcass, Einar continues his search to the village of acquaintances, where he spends 15 days resting and helping his friend Ulf in the hunt. During this time, he prepares for the greatest challenge of his life, hunting Fenrir, the ferocious bear that is one of the Shadow Brothers. His journey takes him to a river, where, after smelling a strange smell and hearing Fenrir's powerful roar, Einar prepares for combat. The bear appears with uncontrollable strength, and an epic battle begins. Einar, using his cunning and skill, faces Fenrir, but the fight does not end immediately. The fight continues, with the hunter showing determination and courage. Ultimately, Einar manages to defeat Fenrir the bear after a brutal battle. But although he is victorious, he knows that his mission is not yet complete. The third and final brother, Skarn, the leader of the Shadow Brothers, continues to pose a threat, and the search for him will become Einar's next challenge as he continues his epic journey. There is something about Einar's figure that goes beyond the mere appearance of an experienced hunter. His gaze carries the weight of someone who has faced the most indomitable forces of nature and emerged not unscathed, but stronger. Now, faced with an almost mythical challenge, his determination is tested once again. Skarn, the bear who rules the Shadow Brothers, is not just an adversary. He is the legend that hunters whisper around campfires, with words full of respect and fear. Einar knows that he is not just after a gigantic animal. He is chasing something bigger, something that challenges the balance between man and wild. Einar's every step in the snow brings him closer to the unknown. Skarn's tracks are not easy to follow, as if the bear understands that being found is both a curse and an affront to his sovereignty. Dense, icy forests create a natural labyrinth that challenges him at every turn, but Einar is prepared. He has spent weeks planning this hunt, studying the terrain, listening to the village elders, and even interpreting the signs in nature. To him, every tree around him seems to whisper a warning. Every distant sound in the forest becomes a clue, or perhaps a trap. But what truly sets Einar apart from the others is his ability to see beyond the obvious. He understands that the battle against Skarn will be as much mental as physical. The bear does not lead the Shadow Brothers by brute force alone. His cunning is almost human, making him a unique opponent. Einar carries with him not only weapons, but the certainty that he is about to face more than a beast. He is about to face an ancient force that seems to embody the very essence of chaos. Little did he know that this hunt would not only be a test of skill, but an encounter with destiny. Skarn is more than a bear. He is a storm in the form of a beast, a primal force that seems to have emerged from the darkest corners of nature. His size is impressive, but it is what he represents that causes true fear. With a black coat that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it, he moves through the forest like a living shadow, silent when he needs to be, but deafening when he decides to attack. His roar echoes through the valleys and mountains, a sound that makes even the fiercest predators flee like helpless prey. It is no wonder that stories about him are told in whispers, as if mentioning him would incur his wrath. When Skarn attacks, there is no room for hesitation. He does not chase his prey like other bears. He corners it, forcing it to face its own fear before delivering the final blow. It is as if he understands the psychology of confrontation, a predator that manipulates not only the environment, but also the emotions of its victim. Many a daring or foolish hunter who has attempted to confront him has not only lost his life, he has vanished without a trace, as if Skarn had erased his existence. His razor-sharp claws can split tree trunks in a single blow, while his teeth crush bone with terrifying ease. But it is his intelligence that makes him truly fearsome. He does not act on pure instinct. He calculates, waits, and strikes at the precise moment when victory is assured. Skan's temperament is a mixture of patience and latent fury, a combination that makes him as unpredictable as he is dangerous. He does not attack without purpose. Every move is deliberate. Every decision seems to be guided by something beyond the simple need for survival. When Skan leads the Shadow Brothers, it is not only his strength that holds them together, but the aura of respect and terror that he exudes. Even the storms seem to align in his favor, as if nature conspired to protect him. With every step he takes, it is as if the forest itself bows to his command. For Einar, facing Skan will not be just a battle against an animal, but against a living legend who defies the very laws of nature. 2 years had passed since the battles that had made Einar a living legend among his people. Bjorn, with his cunning, and Fenrir, with his brutality, had been defeated, but the victory did not bring the peace he had hoped for. Skan remained at large, like a shadow that insisted on haunting his thoughts. During this time, Einar dedicated himself to tracking down the leader of the Shadow Brothers, but it seemed that the bear had disappeared like the fog from the mountains. It was not for lack of effort. He explored the densest forests, the deepest valleys, and even regions that not even the most daring hunters dared to tread. Still, each attempt ended in a frustrating void. Life in the village went on, but Einar could not adjust to the quiet routine. While others celebrated the stories of their past victories, he felt the weight of an unfinished task. His maps were covered with notes, scribbles indicating trails, suspicious sightings, and patterns he tried to decipher. Sometimes he wondered if Skan was still alive or if he had become something even more elusive, an uncatchable legend. But for him, giving up was never an option. The silence of the forest, the absence of signs, all seemed to conspire against him, but they also fueled his determination. Einar knew that finding Skan required more than strength or patience. It required understanding the enemy itself. He spent hours talking to other hunters and elders, listening to stories of bears that would disappear for years only to reappear in unexpected places. Some suggested that Skan had retreated to an unreachable region, a terrain that only he knew. Others believed that the bear was preparing, just as Einar had. Each theory fueled the fire in his chest, and he knew that time was as much an enemy as Skan. Still, Einar pressed on, a man determined to face the inevitable, even without knowing when or where that confrontation would occur. On one of his many quests, while exploring a forgotten trail among the mist-shrouded hills, Einar came across a figure he had not expected to meet, an experienced skald, already advanced in years, but with eyes that still shone with the vigor of one who knows the secrets of the world. The man was sitting beside a small fire, humming ancient melodies as he sharpened a piece of wood with his dagger. Intrigued, Einar approached, sharing the hospitality of the flame and a piece of dry bread. After a few words of introduction, the skald looked up, fixing him with an enigmatic expression. "You seek something that no one else dares to seek, do you not?" the old man said, his tone more affirmative than questioning. Einar nodded, making no secret of his purpose. Upon hearing about Skan, the skald smiled grimly. "There is an island to the north, which men call the Savage Hold, a place where few return to tell tales. But those who do speak of beasts greater than imagination and dangers that test even the strongest." Einar listened intently, feeling the weight of the words as if they were a warning. The skald described the island as a place difficult to access, surrounded by treacherous waters and inhabited by animals that only the cruelest nature could forge. But what caught Einar's attention the most was when the skald added, "Some say that Skan, or something like him, has been seen there. If you truly wish to face him, this may be your path, but it will not be easy." The journey to the savage stronghold seemed too high a stake, even for such a seasoned hunter. Yet Einar felt the same drive that had guided him for years. He thanked the Skald for his wisdom, knowing that every detail of their conversation would bring him closer to his goal. The island was now more than a name. It was a destination, and perhaps within it lay the answer he had been seeking. After hearing the Skald's revelations, Einar knew he couldn't set out for the wilderness without first gathering all the information he could. He needed a solid plan, something that would increase his chances against the island's unforgiving nature. It was then that he decided to visit Ulf, his old friend and ally from so many hunts. Upon meeting him, Einar realized that time had done little to diminish Ulf's strength and wit, who seemed as vigorous as ever. The two exchanged stories, brief laughs, and a good meal before Einar finally revealed the reason for his visit. When he mentioned the wilderness, Ulf raised his eyebrows, invisibly surprised. "You are a brave man, Einar, or a fool. I haven't decided which," he said, half joking, half serious. Ulf, in turn, knew that his contribution would be essential to helping his friend. He took him to the council of his clan's elders, men and women who had accumulated centuries of knowledge about the world around them. Einar found himself in front of faces marked by time, but with eyes that still emanated wisdom and respect for the wild nature. The elders spoke of the wilderness in voices filled with seriousness, describing violent seas that protected the island like a shield and dense forests where predators gave no respite. Einar listened to each word as if it were gold. They explained the dangers of the sea crossing and the unpredictable changes in the weather that could turn an ordinary journey into a nightmare. "If you want to get there, you will need a strong boat, sufficient provisions, and someone who knows the treacherous currents of that region," warned one of the elders, pointing to the rudimentary maps they had drawn on the dirt floor. With these directions, Einar felt that the destination of the wilderness was closer than ever. The decision was made, and Einar knew he could not set out alone. The wilderness was an unforgiving place, and only with a group of experienced warriors would he have any chance of surviving the dangers of the island. He gathered a select group of 20 Vikings, men and women who, like him, bore the scars of past battles and the desire to face the unknown. Ulf, of course, was among them, his right-hand man, ever faithful, ever prepared. The atmosphere was charged with energy, the kind of tension that only appears when a challenging journey approaches. In the days that followed, Einar and his group devoted themselves to meticulous preparation. The first step was to ensure that everyone had the necessary provisions to endure the crossing, which could last weeks depending on the weather and sea currents. The food was carefully selected: cured meat, smoked fish, barley breads that could last for many days without spoiling. To ensure that no one went hungry, Einar had their stocks of medicinal herbs and roots with healing properties replenished, as well as forged more weapons, as they knew that survival on the island would depend as much on strength as on knowledge of what the land could offer. Einar also ordered all members of the group to review their equipment. Armor and shields were inspected and reinforced, as the island's climate could be treacherous, with strong winds and sudden storms. Blades were sharpened to the limit, and each Viking was given an oil lantern for the dark nights, as well as ropes, anchors, and nets, essential to ensure that they were prepared for any unexpected obstacles. Once everything was in order, Einar finally made his way to the Draka, the majestic Viking ship that would take them to the island. The vessel, with its large sails and borders decorated with ancient runes, was ready for the crossing. Beside Ulf, Einar watched the assembled group. The tension in the air was palpable, but there was also a blaze of determination in every Viking's eyes. The oars were trimmed, the sails hoisted, and the anchors raised. The sea was calm that morning, as if it felt the weight of all the fates that the journey would bring. Einar climbed aboard the longship, followed by Ulf and the other warriors. Final instructions were given, and with a roar of command, the sails began to fill. The journey to the Walderhold had begun. The journey began under a partly cloudy sky, the sea calm and silent as the longship cut through the waters. The sails were well set, catching the favorable wind, and the Vikings' oars moved with practiced precision, a collective effort without words but full of understanding. Einar watched the horizon, his gaze fixed, as if the sea were trying to hide secrets. Although the weather had been calm at first, he knew that this could change at any moment. The ocean, as always, was unpredictable, and the northern waters, especially, had a reputation for turning treacherous without warning. A few days into the journey, the weather began to change. The strong wind that had previously helped speed the crossing became a challenge. The waves began to pick up, and the boat suddenly felt like a leaf being tossed across a rough sea. The biting cold increased, chilling the bones of the Vikings, who wrapped themselves in their furs and blankets. Despite this, no one complained. The sea was part of their lives, and they knew that if they were to reach the savage redoubt, they would have to overcome whatever challenges the ocean might throw at them. The nights were long and silent, except for the howling wind and the snapping of sails. One morning, the approaching storm finally arrived. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the waves that crashed violently against the longship. Ulf, with his sharp instinct, commanded the Vikings to adjust the sails and reinforce the ship's safety. All members of the group were prepared, moving in perfect synchrony, as if they had faced this kind of adversity countless times before. The wind howled stronger, and the waves seemed to want to swallow the ship, but the longship, built to withstand the lash of the sea, resisted. For hours, they sailed in this state, until, finally, the storm passed, leaving behind a clear sky and an ocean of dark but calm waters. After this ordeal, the sea calmed again, and the island finally began to form on the horizon. Its almost mystical silhouette seemed to be lurking in the mists of dawn. As they approached, Einar felt a sense of relief, but also a twinge of anxiety. What awaited them in this unknown land? The dense forests and wild animals that the Skald had mentioned were not a promise of welcome, but a warning. When the longship finally touched the sands of the coast, all the Vikings disembarked quickly, and the sound of the retreating waves was the only music that accompanied them as they set up camp. Einar looked out at the jungle that stretched out ahead. They had arrived, but now the real ordeal began. The journey across the island proved to be far more challenging than Einar and his group had imagined. Each step on the damp ground of the dense forest seemed to bring a new challenge. From the beginning, the Vikings had known that survival would be a test of endurance, and the wild and untamed environment around them grew more hostile with each passing day. The humid heat of midday turned the atmosphere into an oven, and the night brought a biting cold, which, combined with the pitch-black darkness, left everyone on the defensive. But the worst was yet to come. During the first few days of exploration, Einar had been watching closely for signs of Skarn's presence. Deep footprints and scratches on trees indicated that the bear was closer than he had imagined, but no matter how much they followed these clues, the great bear always seemed to be ahead, leading the group on trails that only took them further away from its true location. The sound of the island's forests sometimes seemed to be absolute silence, as if nature itself was aware of the Vikings' arrival and their purpose. But at other times, the atmosphere seemed to carry an electric tension, as if something were lurking. The group faced a few battles, although none of them were significant in terms of impact. In the first encounters with wild creatures, such as wolves and boars, the Vikings quickly gained the upper hand. But these encounters, as intense as they were not comparable to the real challenge that Einar felt approaching. Skarn was somewhere in the vastness of the island, and his presence carried a weight that made everything else irrelevant. With each step, the hunter knew that he was getting closer to the final confrontation, but he also felt that nature was testing his patience and endurance. In the days that followed, the island's weather became increasingly unpredictable. They faced sudden storms, but nothing compared to the force of the storm they had crossed at sea. The forests were dense and closed, with trees that seemed to crowd together to obscure the path. Rapid streams and narrow creeks appeared as the group delved deeper, forcing them to search for new ways to cross. The smell of wet earth, the sound of leaves and twigs breaking underfoot, and the constant feeling that something was watching them kept the Vikings on their toes. Then, on the 5th day of their search, just as Einar was beginning to believe that he might never find Skan, something happened. A deep, resonant roar rent the air. It was so powerful that it seemed to come from the very heart of the island, reverberating through the trees and the ground. The sound made everyone's blood freeze in their veins, and for a moment, the entire forest seemed to have gone still, as if the world itself had stopped. It was as if the earth, the winds, and the trees were all in tune with the arrival of the great bear. The roar seemed otherworldly, something that transcended the simple ferocity of a bear. It was a sound that carried the strength of the entire wild nature of the island. The vibration of this presence seemed to distort the very air. Einar felt his heart race, not from fear, but from pure adrenaline. The hunt he had begun so long ago was finally about to reach its climax. The trees around him seemed to bend at the magnitude of this presence, as if aware of what was to come. Ulf, at his side, also felt the impact of the roar and paused for a moment, eyes wide, before taking a step forward, more determined than ever. Einar signaled for the group to prepare. Everyone was alert, silent, fear replaced by fierce determination. The forest seemed darker now, more silent, and each step they took echoed like a harbinger of the imminent encounter. And then, they saw it. Skan, the immense bear of the Shadow Brothers, stood before them. His size was terrifying. His claws were as sharp as razors, and his eyes glowed with a savage intensity that seemed to reflect the fury of a storm. He stood still, watching them with an unsettling calm, as if he were sizing up his prey. This was the moment Einar had been waiting for, but it was also the moment he had been dreading, because he knew it would not be an easy battle. The great bear gave another roar, louder than the first, and the earth seemed to shake beneath his feet. Einar, his heart pounding, charged forward. This was a test not only of strength, but of courage, determination, and the very spirit of survival. He knew that this encounter would define everything he had become as a hunter. But before he could take the next step, the bear disappeared into the shadows of the trees, as if it knew that the tension and anticipation had reached its peak. But Einar was not mistaken. The final showdown was about to take place, and the hunt would now become a fight for his life. Without time for a coordinated reaction, Skan appeared, quick as lightning. His massive body, a huge and menacing shadow, was first seen by the tracks that broke through the trees and the earth around him. There was no sound of footsteps. He was simply there, in a ferocious leap, falling on the Vikings as if the ground itself had split open. The attack was brutal and precise. He used his razor-sharp claws, cutting down the nearest warriors before any of them could even draw their swords. Skan's strength was immense, his body a wall of muscle and fury, devastating anything that stood in his way. Chaos immediately ensued. Screams of pain and despair echoed through the forest. Einar could see one of his men being ripped from the ground by a single blow from the bear's gigantic paw, while another was thrown backwards, falling lifeless against a tree. Ulf, next to Einar, held his axe tightly, trying to stay on his feet, but Skan's strength was incomprehensible. "Doug," although not the most intelligent, fought with the courage of a lion. He was one of the few who resisted long enough to approach Einar, brandishing his sword furiously. But he also knew that his strength would not be enough to defeat that monster. The Vikings who were further away tried to organize a line of defense, but Skan attacked them at such a dizzying pace that, in a matter of minutes, more than half of the group had fallen. Only Einar, Ulf, and Doug remained. Einar, with his heightened senses, realized that the fight was more than just physical. It was a test of endurance, not only for the body, but also for the soul. They were facing a beast that represented the pinnacle of destruction, and the battle was no longer just for life, but for the honor of resisting until the end. Skan stepped back for a moment, as if to size up his prey, and the presence he emanated was even more terrifying than his physical appearance. There was nothing normal about this bear. The roar he gave before attacking, a mix of raw power and an ancient curse, reverberated through the hills, and Einar knew in that instant that he was facing something much greater than a simple beast. The battle he had in mind would be much more than a simple war of strength. He had to find a way to survive this battle in another way. The confrontation was now reduced to a small circle of resistance, with Skan dominating the terrain. They needed to hold out until they found an opening to defeat him. And in Einar's mind, a single question echoed. How far could he take this fight? The air was heavy, stifled by the tension of the fight that was unfolding around Einar, Ulf, and Doug. Skan, the enormous bear, dominated the battlefield with impressive ferocity. Each blow he struck made the earth tremble, and the echoes of his presence were like thunder that split the sky. Einar's survival instinct, sharper than ever, drove him to act, even when exhaustion almost overcame him. Ulf's look showed that, despite his strength, there was also hopelessness in his chest. But Doug, the bravest, stood firm, facing the giant with the strength of a man who already knew that fear would not be his companion. The fight was dragging on. The three were at a disadvantage, but Viking pride would never let them give up. Einar, observing Skan's behavior, noticed a weak point. The bear, though immense and powerful, seemed to hesitate for moments, as if it were calculating each move, as if it were enjoying the pain it was causing. Einar knew this was his chance. He lunged to Skan's side, dodging a devastating blow that sliced through the air with brutal force, and with a primal scream, thrust his sword into the bear's most vulnerable spot, its throat. The impact of the blade on Skan's body was like the sound of a rock breaking, but the bear did not flinch. With a scream of fury, Skan spun around with lightning speed, catching Einar by surprise. The blade of his sword stuck in his flesh, but Skan, with a devastating blow, knocked Einar to the ground, leaving a trail of blood. Ulf, shouting Einar's name, rushed to help, but the bear was already prepared for another attack. It was then that Doug, in an act of desperation and absolute courage, advanced with everything he had. His sword, although clumsy in his hands, found a space between Skan's thick skin. The blow was not perfect, but it was enough to make Skan falter for an instant. That single moment of distraction was all Einar needed to get up and, with renewed strength, drive his sword into the bear's vital spot, between the thickness of its skin and its muscles. The sound of the blade penetrating Skan was like a crack of thunder, and the giant bear roared, but this time with a roar of pain. Skan staggered, weakening with each movement, until finally he fell, heavy as a mountain. The bear, the myth, was defeated. The ground, now impregnated with the blood of the great enemy, seemed to breathe along with the survivors. Einar, still panting and wounded, looked at his friends, and silence reigned for a few seconds, as if everyone was processing what they had just experienced. "We did it," murmured Ulf, with a tired smile. but one of great relief. Doug, wide-eyed, looked at the bear's body and then at Einar, speechless, only knowing that his sacrifice had been worth it. Einar finally took a deep breath, feeling the pain in his body, but also the weight of victory. The island, silent again, seemed to watch the three warriors, now scarred by that battle, but with the momentary peace that only those who had survived a brutal war could understand. The fight was won, but what would come next, Einar still did not know. However, one thing was certain: his journey was far from over. The journey was complete. Einar, Ulf, and Doug, the three surviving heroes, had crossed the dense forests and vast fields of the island, their bodies scarred but their souls filled with the energy of a victory that would echo for generations. In the distance, the coast of their homeland rose like a promise of peace won through blood, sweat, and courage. The sky was tinged with gold and blue, and the sea, calm after days of storms, reflected the immensity of what they had overcome. When the three finally stepped onto familiar land, the village was in full celebration. The sound of flutes and drums filled the air, while children ran, elders murmured in respect, and women prepared feasts. The cry of victory spread like wildfire through the village. The Shadow Brothers have fallen. Skan is dead. It was the conclusion of a legend, the certainty that terror had been banished. But more than that, it was the recognition that, with bravery and sacrifice, they had defeated what seemed invincible. The greatest banquet in history was being prepared. The smell of roast meat and fresh bread filled the air. Einar, with a dirty face and tired body, saw the horn of mead being raised towards him. To victory, to the heroes of the village, to the legends that were born of our blood, shouted Ulf, with a smile of tiredness and pride. Doug, in turn, just looked at his friends, still trying to absorb the meaning of what they had achieved. But the shine in his eyes said it all. The three looked at each other and, without words, raised their horns, drinking deeply of the mead, the drink that sealed the pact of union and courage. As the night progressed and the shouts of joy echoed throughout the village, Einar looked at the fire, the flames dancing with the wind, and felt the weight of everything he had experienced. He knew that peace today did not mean the absence of battles tomorrow, but he also knew that wounds heal, and that true victory lies not in what is conquered, but in what is learned along the way. And to what is to come, thought Einar, as the last drop of mead fell from his horn, and the Vikings around him continued to sing the ancient sagas. And so, with victory in their veins and the fire of adventure burning brighter than ever, the legend of Einar and the Brothers of the Shadows was sung by the skalds, engraved in the memory of all who were there. And the saga, with the same strength of the great Viking stories, would go on. For in the north, where the wind is cold and the battles are constant, true heroes never rest. They only await the next call to bravery. Did you like this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next epic sagas. The journey continues.